What's up, everybody? So day 4 has ended. I have 81 kilos up on the board. Let's take a look at some of the results. There were some major upsets and some people had to really battle through to make it into the medal round. So let's just take a look just right here off the rip and see where we went right. So we had Cass here of Belgium making it through to the quarters. We had Antoine winning his first match. We had the Russian winning. Who else did we have? We had Japan. We had Nagase coming all the way through into the final and winning. Oh, losing. Sorry. My bad. I forgot I wanted the Israeli guy to pull that out. So just into the final. Down here, this was a huge upset in the second round, which we'll talk about later. The German we had losing to DeWitt, and he actually ended up winning. So props to him for that. That's a big win. If you go back and watch that match, one of the new rules in judo is if both your hands touch behind you, like you're trying to press yourself up and make sure your back doesn't hit the floor, automatically it was Ari, and they got tangled up, and the German went for a big pickup, and he ended up twisting behind, and both DeWitt's hands went straight back and planted onto the ground. He basically was sitting, but because both hands touched the ground, they have to call Wazari. It was in golden score, I believe. So match ended there. Another big upset that happened throughout the day was the Portugal guy in the first round. And I had him beating the kid from Austria, but the kid from Austria actually pulled his way all the way through, which was unbelievably impressive. So let's come back down here. We had Uzbekistan coming through, so pretty solid there. Same thing, Ivanov coming in. We had the Georgian all the way through. He ended up losing to Moli, who we had coming through here. And then we had Azerbaijan coming up. That was a fairly easy pick, just nice and simple. Had the Korean beating Nassif. And I believe that is it as far as where I was standing as far as the rest of the bracket goes. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think a couple of things that I want to talk about first is up here in the bracket at the very, very start of the tournament. So at the very start of this event, I think right when I turned the TV on, because I was a couple minutes late, but Cass was actually losing to Puerto Rico in the first round. And typically if you saw my other videos from the other breakdowns, when a player is down, right, they're down by a Wazari, the odds of them coming back are very slim. I think in the entire tournament to date, we've had less than 10 matches where both judoka have scored in the same round. But we see Cass and his class and how skilled he is able to battle back, because in the first round, he gets thrown for Wazari. He ends up getting it back and then scoring again and throwing the guy for Ippon. In the second round, again, Cass gets hit with another foot sweep, but I believe it's to the other side, gets thrown for Wazari again, comes back next exchange, throws the Swedish boy for another Wazari, comes back later into golden score. So look at these. Right here, these green dots are representing matches where both players have scored. The orange dots are where a player has gotten 2 Shidos, and the red line that you see here represents a match going to golden score. So when we follow Cass's way through the bracket, you can see both players have scored, right? Number 1 player coming into it fighting unranked guys. Both players have scored. Both players in instances have been able to take him the distance and further, right? Both players taking him to golden score. Then we come over here, Kubetsov, the Russian. The Russian didn't score, but the Russian took him 7 minutes into golden score, and Cass was actually able to get him the 3rd Shido, which is unbelievably impressive. And I think when we look at my side of the bracket, I had the Canadian winning here, but I remember talking about how difficult this match would be for the Canadian. It's not a good matchup for him. And when we put the Belgium here, I actually had the Belgium guy beating beating the Japanese guy coming through. But I thought the Japanese guy was going to work his way through because Canada was going to win this match. So I was a little off there. I think at the top row, when you take Cass, the Russian, Nagase, Antoine, DeWitt, which is another person down here we should talk about. I think they can all pretty much on any given day beat each other. So high level of judo coming through. When we come down here to DeWitt, huge upset. Again, Russell with that pickup ending up throwing DeWitt shakes up the bracket entirely, and it's just, you know, you rarely don't see DeWitt medal when he fights, or at least fighting for a medal. To see him out before the quarters, extremely rare. And if we keep going, we have the Austrian guy who actually ended up medaling through this bracket, who we're going to talk about later, but ends up beating the guy from Portugal, just like manhandled Mookie. I couldn't believe it. I don't know if he planned that strategy or if he was just like, I don't know if I can throw him, so I'm just going to keep knocking him to the ground. He was basically flinging Mookie over the top of him, so Mookie had to play a defense. So the refs couldn't Shido him, but Mookie also didn't have the time, because every time Mookie grabbed the gi, the guy was flinging him over the top of him, dropping underneath him, and it looked almost impossible for Mookie to get any throws off. And it ends up going 8 minutes and 30 seconds before the Austrian boy actually catches Mookie in a bear hug, where he ends up taking him over the side, throwing him for Wazari. So I feel bad for Mookie. I really wanted him to come through. He just wasn't able to do it. I think the big letdown of the tournament, for 81 kilos anyway, is right here, the Uzbekistan boy. He just, man, he couldn't get anything going all day. He kind of just stood in front of everybody, waited everybody out, took everybody, you know, forever. I mean, he ends up pinning the first guy in the first round, but watching this match right here, it goes 9 minutes and 50 seconds. Like, just zero type of like go get 'em attitude coming through, which is rare because this guy's usually a big thrower. I think it's his first Olympics, so coming into it, he was just nervous, anxiety, didn't want to lose. And when you fight with the mentality of not wanting to lose, it hinders your ability to win. And I think we saw that today. So it was just one of those things where experience really is needed at the Olympics, or the I don't care attitude. I'm here to win. I'm going to give it my all, and I'm going to work my way through the bracket, which is what the Austrian boy did. Here in the bottom half of the bracket, again, like you could just tell the Georgian was on a different level. He kind of just manhandled everybody his way through, which is why we end up seeing Molly come through. And I wasn't able to see this match. Something happened with the cable, but I guess at the end of the day, both players scored. So the Georgian catches him right off the rip, but then Molly comes back at the 2-minute mark and ends up throwing him for Ippon. When we look at the crossovers down here, it's an interesting way of looking at it because you have the two better players down here. Like I could easily, if we put one of these guys up here and one of these guys down here, you see both these guys medal. But just because of the way the draw works itself out, they end up fighting each other for bronze. Now only one of them can medal, and the Belgium guy comes through. Let's take a look over here. Where were my picks? Let's line these bad boys up. There we go. So I think for me, having the Israeli guy drop off right off the top, that's a little bit of a challenge for me. I just didn't see it coming. The Austrian guy just wasn't even on my radar, and I'll talk about why. But we had the Japanese guy in the final. We had the Mongolian guy medaling. And then the other one that we had medaling was the Belgian player who also fought for a medal. So we had 3 of the 4 people in the medal rounds stepping on the podium. We just missed out on a couple of the others because the Israeli guy gets knocked out by the Austrian, who actually ends up pulling out a medal. So all in all, not terrible picks, not a bad way to look at the draw. But I want to step over here for a second, and let's just take a look at some of the stats from the day. Now, important to just kind of note when we're looking at this, right? The Austrian boy starts the event off at 22 in the world. But now let's take a look at this. 0 world championships, 0 Olympic Games experience, because this is the one from last night. World Masters, best we ever did was 7th and other. The Grand Slam event is actually from this year. So how much credit do you want to put into it with the COVID year? People just coming back, like, does the silver really matter? Continental Championships, not even a top 7 out of 3 tries. We're barely into a bronze. I'd have to go back and see what year that was, just going into it. So when I was looking at the draw, I was like, he's out. No questions asked. Like, he just doesn't have the stats to do what he did. But at the end of the day, that mental attitude of I'm here to win, you can see it just plays a huge role. And when we look down here, remember, he's 22 in the world. Round number 1, beats 19. Takes him the distance, right? Pushes him all the way into those later parts of the rounds, deep waters, ends up getting the victory. Does the same thing to the world number 2. Takes him into really deep waters and is like, you know what? Mental error on the Israeli's part coming through. Then, again, another seeded athlete. Takes him into deep waters, ends up pulling it out, right? You've just got to be able to go the distance. Mongolia ends up losing. Again, seeded player. So when we look at this, he has match 1, match 2 seeded, match 3 seeded, match 4, all seeded players coming into this at 22. He ends up winning 2 of the 3, where he ends up fighting for bronze, and he ends up going against the German, which at the end of the day, when we look over here, the only reason why the German is there is because he gets that good win over DeWitt from the Netherlands here in the 2nd round. And this actually ends up changing the entire tournament, because if you put DeWitt here and DeWitt losing, DeWitt comes through, and I'm not so sure the Austrian boy is able to pull this win off, and he probably ends up taking 5th. But another thing to note, again, just following the stats of where judo's at, as a whole, 81 kilos had 38 total matches. 17 of all those matches went into golden score. So 45% of all matches fought at 81 kilos end up going into the later distance. 12 matches out of the 38, so 32% of all matches in the 81 kilo weight class, one of the players getting 2 Shidos, putting on that pressure where the atmosphere of judo could potentially force mistakes. Now, that's not to say that the players that got 2 Shidos ended up losing. Some of them who got 2 Shidos actually ended up throwing for Ippon or throwing for Wazari in the later round or in the later part of the event. Sometimes what you see happen here is you'll see players who aren't as technically savvy. They'll try to hustle their opponents. And while the refs will Shido trying to get the other player to be a little bit more active, it's very difficult to end a match on that 3rd Shido if the ref sees you trying to hustle. And one of the areas where we saw just that is if we come over here, down here, was right here. This match right here, the Uzbekistan guy versus the Bulgarian guy, if you go back and watch this, it's kind of painful to watch, but if you go back and watch it, you could tell the Bulgarian player was like, I don't feel comfortable making a serious commitment, but all of my attacks are going to be just strong enough to not get a penalty. And what you end up seeing happen is it goes 9 minutes and 50 seconds before the Uzbekistan player ends up throwing the Bulgarian. There were a lot of times, even Neil Adams, when he was commentating, was like, are we going to give the Uzbekistan guy a Shido here? And the refs just wouldn't do it. They don't want to end the matches on a player out hustling another player. Now, if you're dominant and you're going after them and they're taking knees, that's one thing. But if you're just dropping and they're kind of just scooting around your throws, if you're flinging them over the top, they're not necessarily going to see you as, trying to actually get that score off versus, hey, I'm just trying to move my partner around to hopefully get that Shido. I think the refs did a really good job during this event, because if we took this number, right, these 12 Shidos here, and you said, okay, out of the 12, how many actually got the 3rd? I bet you it's 2. I bet you it's 3. There's not a lot. They're just being put on that pressure of having to do quality judo. And I think it just forces some mistakes on some players' part. And it's just something to look at. It's also something to look at where we've had the most number of matches where both judoka have scored, where we're at 3 total matches. So 8% of all matches in 81 kilos, both players are going to score. So I'd like to see that number go up. If a player is going to score, I'd like to see the back and forth where players are opening up and they're able to score. But again, like with a 4-minute clock, if it takes you 2 minutes to score, the likelihood of you playing a little bit of defense, doing a little bit of newaza, it's hard to get that second score back. So it's a good thing if you're an up-and-coming competitor. Just take that into note that if you can score and be first on the board, if you're tactic enough, if your gripping is enough, and your strategy is there, you can win and steal a lot of judo matches. So at the end of the day, there's the 81 kilo breakdown. Let's take a look at the women's.